Welcome back for Chapter 4 of the Scarlet Letter. This chapter is called The Interview. So, at the end of Chapter 3, you have Hester. She has just been up on the scaffold. She refused to name the father of the child, even though she's been asked once again. And at the end of the chapter, they led her back into the prison. Chapter 4 picks up right after that, basically. She's been back to the prison for a little while. It's now evening or night sometime, and she is not well. After her return to the prison, Hester Prynne was found to be in a state of nervous excitement that demanded constant watchfulness lest she should perpetrate violence on herself or do some half-frenzied mischief to the poor babe. As night approached, it proving impossible to quell her insubordination by rebuke or threats of punishment, Master Brackett, the jailer, thought fit to introduce a physician. So, ever since Hester got back from the scaffold earlier, she has been in a state of nervous excitement. So, she's sort of hysterical. And they've had to keep a really close eye on her because they are afraid that she might try to harm herself or the baby, even. And after nothing else has worked, they've tried to get her to stop, calm down, whatever, and none of it's worked. So Master Brackett, who is the jailer, he's been mentioned before, he has called a doctor. He described him as a man of skill in all Christian modes of physical science, and likewise familiar with whatever the savage people could teach, in respect to medicinal herbs and roots that grew in the forest. To say the truth, there was much need of professional assistance, not merely for Hester herself, but still more urgently for the child, who, drawing its sustenance from the maternal bosom, seemed to have drank in with it all the turmoil, the anguish, and despair which pervaded the mother's system. It now writhed in convulsions of pain, and was a forcible type, in its little frame, of the moral agony which Hester Prynne had borne throughout the day. So not only is Hester in this agitated, hysterical state, but the baby is as well. And they say that's because the baby has basically drank in all of Hester's emotions and stress through breast milk. And so that's why the baby's so hysterical. Closely following the jailer into the dismal apartment appeared that individual of singular aspect, whose presence in the crowd had been of such deep interest to the wearer of the Scarlet Letter. He was lodged in the prison, not as suspected of any offense, but as the most convenient and suitable mode of disposing of him, until the magistrates should have conferred with the Indian sagamores respecting his ransom. His name was announced as Roger Chillingworth. The jailer, after ushering him into the room, remained a moment, marveling at the comparative quiet that followed his entrance, for Hester Prynne had immediately become as still as death, although the child continued to moan. So, the doctor that they brought in, the jailer has announced his name as Roger Chillingworth. This is a main character. This is the same guy that Hester recognized in the crowd earlier. So as soon as he walks in, Hester immediately becomes silent. "Prithee, friend, leave me alone with my patient," said the practitioner. "Trust me, good jailer, you shall briefly have peace in your house, and I promise you Mistress Prynne shall hereafter be more amenable to just authority than you may have found her heretofore." "Nay, if your worship can accomplish that," answered Master Brackett, "I shall own you for a man of skill indeed. Verily, the woman hath been like a possessed one, and there lacks little that I should take in hand to drive Satan out of her with stripes." So Chillingworth says, "Okay, leave us alone. Leave me alone with my patient. And don't worry, she's going to be a lot easier to deal with very soon." The jailer, Master Brackett, says, "If you can do that, you are a man of skill. She's been crazy all day." There's even a mention of Satan. It's like she's acted like she's been possessed by Satan. And they might have to try to beat Satan out of her, which was, again, something that was a common belief, a common practice. They thought people would be possessed by the devil, and they'd have to try to get the devil out of them. The stranger had entered the room with the characteristic quietude of the profession to which he announced himself as belonging. Nor did his demeanor change when the withdrawal of the prison keeper left him face to face with the woman whose absorbed notice of him in the crowd had intimated so close a relation between himself and her. His first care was given to the child, whose cries indeed, as she lay writhing on the trundle bed, made it a peremptory necessity to postpone all other business to the task of soothing her. He examined the infant carefully, and then proceeded to unclasp a leathern case which he took from beneath his dress. It appeared to contain medical preparations, one of which he mingled with a cup of water. "My old studies in alchemy," observed he, "and my sojourn for above a year past among a people well versed in the kindly properties of simples, have made a better physician of me than many that claim the medical degree. Here, woman, the child is yours, she is none of mine. Neither will she recognize my voice or aspect as a father's. Administer this draught, therefore, with thine own hand." So this guy, Roger Chillingworth, he explains that he used to study alchemy, which this was a medieval form of chemistry. They was kind of connected with magic. They would try to transform worthless metals into gold. It didn't work, obviously. So he used to study alchemy, and he says, "My sojourn for above a year past among a people well versed in the kindly properties of simples." So he's referring to the time that he spent with the Indians, and all of their knowledge of herbs and plants and stuff that were native to the land. He says those two things have given him more qualifications as a doctor than the people who have the actual medical degree. So he's not actually um, a doctor, but he's presented himself as one. And I will mention that the Puritans would have needed a doctor. The book mentions that later. So they don't really question him. They're just glad to have a doctor. He's mixed up this medicine for the baby, and he gives it to Hester. He says, "Here, she's your child. She doesn't know me. You give her the medicine." Hester repelled the offered medicine, at the same time gazing with strongly marked apprehension into his face. "Wouldst thou avenge thyself on the innocent babe?" whispered she. "Foolish woman," responded the physician, half coldly, half soothingly, "what should ail me to harm this misbegotten and miserable babe? The medicine is potent for good, and were it my child, yea, mine own as well as thine, I could do no better for it." So, Hester hesitates. She doesn't want to give the baby the medicine. She even questions if he would go as far as to poison the child. He says, "Of course not. Don't be ridiculous. If she were my own child, I'd do the same thing." But she's not. As she still hesitated, being in fact in no reasonable state of mind, he took the infant in his arms and himself administered the draught. It soon proved its efficacy and redeemed the leech's pledge. The moans of the little patient subsided, its convulsive tossing gradually ceased, and in a few moments, as is the custom of young children after relief from pain, it sank into a profound and dewy slumber. The physician, as he had a fair right to be termed, next bestowed his attention on the mother. With calm and intent scrutiny, he felt her pulse, looked into her eyes, a gaze that made her heart shrink and shudder, because so familiar and yet so strange and cold. And finally, satisfied with his investigation, proceeded to mingle another draught. So he gives the medicine to the baby himself. It's a little girl, it mentioned. It's a her. And it works. The baby calms down, and now he's examined Hester, and he's mixing something for her. I know not Lethe or Nepenthe, or Nepenthe, remarked he, but I have learned many new secrets in the wilderness, and here is one of them, a recipe that an Indian taught me in requital of some lessons of my own, that were as old as Paracelsus. Drink it. It may be less soothing than a sinless conscience. That I cannot give thee, but it will calm the swell and heaving of thy passion, like oil thrown on the waves of a tempestuous sea. He presented the cup to Hester, who received it with a slow, earnest look into his face. Not precisely a look of fear, yet full of doubt and questioning as to what his purposes might be. She looked also at her slumbering child. I've thought of death, she said, or said she. I've wished for it, would even have prayed for it were it fit that such as I should pray for anything. Yet if death be in this cup, I bid thee think again, ere thou beholdst me quaff it. See, it is even now at my lips. So she takes the medicine he's made for her, and she's hesitant to take it, to drink it. And so she says to him, I've thought about death. I've dreamed of it. I would have prayed for it if I were fit enough to pray for anything. So she's saying she's wished she was dead before. But she says to him, if this cup is going to kill me, if this medicine is going to kill me, then please think again, because I'm getting ready to drink it, and you're going to see it. Drink then, replied he, still with the same cold composure. Dost thou know me so little, Hester Prynne? Are my purposes wont to be so shallow? Even if I imagine a scheme of vengeance, what can I do better for my object than to let thee live? Than to give thee medicines against all harm and peril of life, so that this burning shame may still blaze upon thy bosom. As he spoke, he laid his long forefinger on the scarlet letter, which forthwith seemed to scorch into Hester's breast, as if it had been red hot. He noticed her involuntary gesture and smiled. Live, therefore, and bear about thy doom with thee, in the eyes of men and women, in the eyes of him whom thou didst call thy husband, in the eyes of yonder child, and that thou mayest live. Take off this draught. Without further expostulation or delay, Hester Prynne drained the cup, and at the motion of the man of skill seated herself on the bed where the child was sleeping, while he drew the only chair which the room afforded, and took his own seat beside her. She could not but tremble at these preparations, for she felt that, having now done all that humanity or principle, or if so it were, a refined cruelty impelled him to do, for the relief of physical suffering, he was next to treat with her as the man whom she had most deeply and irreparably injured. Okay, so who is this guy? If you haven't pieced it together or found it on the internet somewhere already, this guy, Roger Chillingworth, is in fact her husband, the one that she hasn't seen in 2 years or so. So he said, I'm going to let you live, or in the paragraph before, he says, you're going to live in the eyes of him whom thou didst call thy husband. So you're going to live right where I can see you. And then the narrator says that this is the man whom she had most deeply and irreparably injured. So this is her husband, which makes sense now why she was dreading seeing him in the last chapter and having to talk to him one-on-one, face-to-face. She's not seen the guy in 2 years, and the first time he sees her, she's had a baby, and it's obviously not his. So now they're going to talk about it. Hester, said he, I ask not wherefore nor how thou hast fallen into the pit, or say rather thou hast ascended to the pedestal of infamy on which I found thee. The reason is not far to seek. So he says, I'm not going to ask how this happened because I have already seen the baby. I understand what is going on. It was my folly and thy weakness. I, a man of thought, the bookworm of great libraries, a man already in decay, having given my best years to feed the hungry dream of knowledge, what had I to do with youth and beauty like thine own? Misshapen from my birth hour, how could I delude myself with the idea that intellectual gifts might veil physical deformity in a younger girl's fantasy? Men call me wise. If sages were ever wise in their own behoof, I might have foreseen all this. I might have known that as I came out of the vast and dismal forest and entered this settlement of Christian men, the very first object to meet my eyes would be thyself, Hester Prynne, standing up, a statue of ignominy, before the people. Nay, from the moment when we came down the old church steps together, a married pair, I might have beheld the bale fire of that Scarlet Letter blazing at the end of our path. Okay, so in this paragraph, Chillingworth says, you know what? It's my fault. I was foolish to think that a man like me, he says he was already older and misshapen, reference to that shoulder deformity. And she was young and pretty, and so he says, I should have known better than to think that this could work. I should have seen this coming. I should have known. Now listen to Hester's response, because she is not holding back right now. So he's been pretty harsh. He's like, I should have seen this coming. I should have known you would do it. Thou knowest, said Hester, for, depressed as she was, she could not endure this last quiet stab at the token of her shame. Thou knowest that I was frank with thee. I felt no love nor feigned any. True, replied he. It was my folly, I have said it, but up to that epoch of my life, I had lived in vain. So her comeback, she says, look, you know that I was frank with thee. I felt no love nor feigned any. So she says, look, I was honest with you from the start. I never told you that I loved you, and I never feigned any, which means I didn't fake it either. I didn't pretend to love you. So she was pretty harsh. He admits, he's like, you're right. I should have known better. I already said that. But up until that point, I had lived in vain. The world had been so cheerless. My heart was a habitation large enough for many guests, but lonely and chill and without a household fire. I longed to kindle one. It seemed not so wild a dream, as old as I was, and somber as I was, and misshapen as I was, that the simple bliss which is scattered far and wide for all mankind to gather up might yet be mine. And so, Hester, I drew thee into my heart, into its innermost chamber, and sought to warm thee by the warmth which thy presence made there. So at this point, you can't help but feel a little bit bad for Chillingworth. He was pretty mean earlier, but here he says, you know what, up until I met you, the world was cheerless. Like he says, I had no purpose in living. So I wanted to love someone, I wanted to start a family, and I wanted to do that with you. I loved you, I took you into my heart, and tried to warm you by the warmth that you created. So in other words, I tried to make you love me. I have greatly wronged thee, murmured Hester. We've wronged each other, answered he. Mine was the first wrong, when I betrayed thy budding youth into a false and unnatural relation with my decay. Therefore, as a man who has not thought and philosophized in vain, I seek no vengeance, plot no evil against thee. Between thee and me, the scale hangs fairly balanced. But Hester, the man lives who has wronged us both. Who is he? Ask me not, replied Hester Prynne, looking firmly into his face. That thou shalt never know. Never, sayest thou? Rejoined he, with a smile of dark and self-relying intelligence. Never know him? Believe me, Hester, there are few things, whether in the outward world or to a certain depth in the invisible sphere of thought, few things hidden from the man who devotes himself earnestly and unreservedly to the solution of a mystery. Thou mayest cover up thy secret from the prying multitude. Thou mayest conceal it too from the ministers and magistrates, even as thou didst this day, when they sought to wrench the name out of thy heart and give thee a partner on thy pedestal. But as for me, I come to the inquest with other senses than they possess. I shall seek this man, as I have sought truth in books, as I have sought gold in alchemy. There is a sympathy that will make me conscious of him. I shall see him tremble. I shall feel myself shudder, suddenly and unawares. Sooner or later, he must needs be mine. Okay, so Hester's feeling kind of bad when she hears what he has to say about how he really tried to love her or get her to love him. And he says, don't worry about it. You know what? I wronged you first when I convinced you to marry me when you were young and beautiful, and I'm old and misshapen. And then you've wronged me by cheating, right? And so he says, I have no issue, like no beef with you, right? I'm not going to try to get even with you. But the man who wronged both of us, I want to know who that is. I want to know who the father is. Hester refuses to tell him. And he says he'll find out. The eyes of the wrinkled scholar glowed so intensely upon her that Hester Prynne clasped her hands over her heart, dreading lest he should read the secret there at once. Thou wilt not reveal his name? Not the less. He is mine, resumed he, with a look of confidence, as if destiny were at one with him. He bears no letter of infamy wrought into his garment as thou dost, but I shall read it on his heart. Yet fear not for him. Think not that I shall interfere with heaven's own method of retribution, or to my own loss betray him to the gripe of human law. Neither do thou imagine that I shall contrive aught against his life, no, nor against his fame, if, as I judge, he be a man of fair repute. Let him live. Let him hide himself in outward honor, if he may. Not the less, he shall be mine. Thy acts are like mercy, said Hester, bewildered and appalled, but thy words interpret thee as a terror. So, in that section, Chillingworth said, don't worry. Once I figure out who it is, I'm not going to turn him over to the law. I'm not going to kill him. I'm not going to do anything. I just need to know. And he's looking all crazy, and that's what she says. You know, the things that you say you're going to do sound merciful, but you don't look like you're being merciful. One thing, thou that wast my wife, I would enjoin upon thee, continued the scholar. Thou hast kept the secret of thy paramour. Keep likewise mine. So he says, you've kept the secret of your lover. Now keep my secret. There are none in this land that know me. Breathe not to any human soul that thou didst ever call me husband. Here, on this wild outskirt of the earth, I shall pitch my tent, for elsewhere a wanderer and isolated from human interests, I find here a woman, a man, a child, amongst whom and myself there exist the closest ligaments. no matter whether of love or hate, no matter whether of right or wrong. Thou and thine, Hester Prynne, belong to me. My home is where thou art, and where he is. But betray me not. So he has asked Hester to keep his secret, and the secret that he wants her to keep is his identity. So I always have some students that are really confused by the fact he doesn't want anyone to know who he is. And it has to do with the fact that he would have to endure some of the shame for having a wife that wasn't faithful. So that's part of it. But he says he's going to stay there because he's going to stay where he has connections. Whether she likes it or not, she's connected to him. The baby's connected. The father's connected. So he says, I'm staying, and don't you dare tell anyone who I am. Wherefore dost thou desire it? Inquired Hester, shrinking, she hardly knew why, from this secret bond. Why not announce thyself openly and cast me off at once? He's explaining, because she says, why do you want that? Why do you want to be a secret? It may be, he replied, because I will not encounter the dishonor that besmirches the husband of a faithless woman. It may be for other reasons. Enough, it is my purpose to live and die unknown. Let therefore thy husband be to the world as one already dead, and of whom no tidings shall ever come. Recognize me not by word, by sign, by look. Breathe not the secret, above all, to the man thou wottest of. Shouldst thou fail me in this, beware. His fame, his position, his life will be in my hands. Beware. So he says, maybe it's because I don't want to have to endure the shame of having a wife that wasn't faithful. It doesn't really matter. He says, just make sure you don't tell anyone, because if you do, your lover, the father of this child, his fate will be in my hands. And he says, I'll destroy him. I will keep thy secret as I have this, said Hester. Swear it, rejoined he, and she took the oath. And now, Mistress Prynne, said old Roger Chillingworth, as he was hereafter to be named, I leave thee alone with thy infant, and the Scarlet Letter. How is it, Hester? Doth thy sentence bind thee to wear the token in thy sleep? Art thou not afraid of nightmares and hideous dreams? Why dost thou smile so at me? Inquired Hester, troubled at the expression of his eyes. Art thou like the black man that haunts the forest round about us? Hast thou enticed me into a bond that will prove the ruin of my soul? Not thy soul, he answered, with another smile. No, not thine. Okay, so at the end here, she's obviously a little creeped out because of the way Chillingworth is acting. She asks him, are you the black man? Now, in Puritan times, the references to black man, you'll notice, at least in my copy, it's capitalized, and I'm sure in the newer versions it is as well. But the reference to the black man is the devil. So she's saying, are you like the devil that haunts the forest? Because something else that we haven't talked about yet is the symbolism with the forest versus the town. So to give you the short version, Puritans believed that the devil was in charge of the forest, all of the wilderness areas where it's kind of like wild, right? It's wild. They believed that Satan was in charge of all of those areas, and that's kind of where Satan lurked and ruled. While the town, or the village, whatever you want to call it, in the civilized portions of the land is where God was in control and God was ruling. So any references to the forest or the black man are really references to evil and to Satan. So she asks if she's just made a deal with the devil, basically, that's going to ruin her soul and make her have to go to hell. And he says, "Not thy soul, no, not thine." So his answer there is, "Not yours, no, not yours." So what do we think that means? If her soul's not in danger, then what does he mean by that? Why does he look so crazy? I'm going to let you think about that one. All right. Before we wrap it up, we'll do just this really quick review of the chapter again. Chapter 4 was the interview. Remember that the misshapen man has presented himself as a doctor by the name of Chillingworth. He was called to Hester's cell to administer medicine because both she and the baby have been hysterical since leaving the scaffold. Chillingworth's actually Hester's husband. We didn't know that. Some of us saw it coming. And she's not seen him in like 2 years. So suddenly all of the scene at the scaffold makes more sense, why she was so weirded out seeing him. They have this really harsh exchange in the jail about their past, and Hester still refuses to tell him who the father of her child is. Chillingworth says he's going to stay here in Boston, and he says he'll figure out who the father is, and makes her promise that she will not reveal his identity. She agrees reluctantly, obviously, but she does agree. And that is where the chapter ends.